Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Hughes. I'm the founder of Biggerplate.com, and it is my pleasure to welcome on your screens today Darius, who's based up in Edinburgh and the founder of ivvi. Darius has got in touch with me, or we got in touch with each other a couple of months back, and I've been learning a little bit more about what he's been doing with ivvi. But I said, what we need to do is get on and do a video interview so I can actually find out a little bit more and share that with our community. So, Darius, first of all, welcome to this video interview, I guess. Maybe give us a little bit of the backstory of ivvi. My first spotting of your name was many years ago on a Udemy course, mind mapping course on Udemy, a very popular course. I believe you had a lot of people taking the course. But thanks for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk about ivvi, learn a little bit more about ivvi. But before we jump into the product and sort of learn what you're doing with that tool, I'm really interested to go back in time and maybe get a little bit of context for people who've not heard of you before or seen ivvi yet. What's the Darius background? Where did it all begin in terms of the mind mapping story for you?
Liam, it's great to be here. I really like what you're doing at Biggerplate. I've been watching it for years. Well, it all started for me at law school. I was at Edinburgh University doing law. I crashed and burned in third year. I did fine in first and second, then third year it was just all too much for me. I left uni and then I discovered mind mapping. And I thought, gosh, I think I could finish uni with this. I went back and I finished my degree with mind mapping. And it was transformative for me because it was the first point time I'd actually learned the whole subject. And I wasn't just gaming the system and learning the bits I had to learn. I just actually really enjoyed thoroughly learning with a mind map. I read Tony Buzan's books and all of that, Use Your Head and so forth. And I just put it into practice, went into lectures and started to live mind map in lectures. And that was transformative for me. Those live mind maps in lectures were so important for me. And
And you
since,
were doing that there. Sorry to interrupt. You were doing that in an era pre-software. You were pen and
yeah,
paper mapping sort of
pen
thing.
and
Yeah.
paper. I'm
Right.
a huge advocate for pen and paper mind mapping.
Yeah.
I love Tony Buzan's kind of principles of, one word on one branch and using imagery and colored branches and organic shapes and things being unique and visual and memorable. I really love all that. And that's what I
Mhm.
taught in the Udemy course as well.
Right. And so you were sort of the origins of Bigger Plate was my abject failures at university. I was a terrible student. It wasn't just that I struggled, I was just useless. And you used the word transformative when you discovered mind mapping, transformative for your studies. And mine was similar. And I've always said mind mapping essentially saved my degree. But it's interesting for me to sort of my discovery of mind mapping was software based, so I was just like, wow, why have I never seen this before? The ability to get ideas in and sort of build stuff and move it around was really absolutely game changing for me. So I'm fascinated that you had a similar experience, but without the software,
Yeah.
and so for you, that was about what was not working. So us go before we got to mind mapping in your world. What was studying like before that for you that was so challenging?
Well, now I realize I've got dyslexia.
Right.
Um, I didn't at the time, but basically I can read just fine. I've read 500, maybe more books in my life, you know. Um, but I process information visually. I need a diagram to see where things are, to arrange it, to draw, to doodle, and I internalize by drawing things out and visualizing. And I kind of need that. And that's what mind mapping did for me. And that's what the transformation. So I kind of felt written notes were like a store of information outside of me. And mind mapping brought the information inside of me and helped me digest the information.
That's interesting, interesting. And so you used the mapping, or mapping kind of helped you to get over that line with the degree. And did you go
Yeah.
forth and conquer the world of law, or did you go into a different field after that? What and so did you keep going with mapping, or I see
Yeah.
and hear a
So
lot of the times where people use mind mapping in education and then they go off and get their first job and they sort of forget all about it because they only think of it as an education tool, not as a working and thinking tool.
yes, so true, Liam. So true. Um, so what happened for me was I got to the point where I could mind map. I have a terrible memory. Okay. Absolutely terrible memory for facts and details and names. And that's a problem with law because you got to remember case names, dates, all sorts of key facts to prove your point in an exam. So what I ended up doing was I would draw a mind map from memory, okay? And I would flash map it. I'd redraw it from memory over and over. I didn't have flashcards, I had flash maps. And I could distill a whole year's worth of studying into one mind map with about 100 elements in it, branches, keywords, images. And I would be able to redraw that mind map as a sketch within about 4 minutes. So when I walked into the exam, before I opened the exam paper and they said, you may begin, I took a piece of paper and I redrew all of my notes in one mind map. And then I could answer all of my questions from my notes, literally. I didn't need to do it from my memory. I could empty my memory. And that's what I actually have been teaching students to do for the last 7 years with dyslexia. And so I developed that technique at uni, and that's why that was great. But since then, what I found was I ended up having to go back to mind mapping because I'd hit a roadblock and I'd write something out. I was giving a talk or I was teaching some children. I became a school teacher after law. I went into primary school education. The law was just to make my mum happy. And you know, you know what it's like. She paid for a private school education to deal with my educational challenges, and I felt obliged to do something with it. Got the
Right.
degree, and then did what I wanted to do, which was to teach.
Fascinating.
And when I was teaching, I ended up finding I was trying to organize my information and take teaching notes. And I've got it right here. Like I've got this 1995 note journal. It's just full of mind map sketches of what I needed to teach so I would start with writing out my notes, and then it would end up having to be a mind map to just get my hand around it. And this is not me thinking, oh, mind maps are the answer. I just thought of mind maps as, oh, quite a useful tool sometimes.
Just yeah,
You
just
know,
yes, it's an unremarkable tool, or
yes,
it should be something that's just as standard as scribbling in a notebook, like I am and like you are. But
right.
and so
Yeah.
in the notebook you've got there, that do you say 1995 notebook?
Yeah, 1995 journal. Yeah, and I've
Fantastic.
got another, 30 years of journals since then
Excellent. I
with
like that.
mind maps all the way through it.
And
And
so in the school context there, Darius, was this a context in which you then started to, you'd been using the mind maps to pass your exams in the law and the student context, in the classroom context as the teacher, were you finding the places where mind mapping fits as a teacher? Were you sort of using it for things, we now know, and we've got webinars and videos on Biggerplate and templates and examples where, for example, teachers are using mind maps for kind of lesson plans, so they can have not a cheat sheet, but a quick prompt for themselves on the side of a desk, which is a little mind map.
yeah,
Or sometimes they're using a
absolutely.
mind map on the big screen to guide the students through a lesson. But again, going back to 1995, sort of era of teaching and mind mapping for you, were you sort of, did you discover where mind mapping fitted into your role as a teacher after experiencing it in the law field, or was it sort of a little bit of experimentation?
Well, this was all before computers, laptops, and mind mapping software, you know. I was doing it all by hand. 1995 was before all that, really. And I was using it for teaching notes, for remembering stories I had to tell, for writing stories, writing poems, lesson plans. It was all mostly for me. I never used it as a memory aid or tool for the class itself. I was part of the Rudolf Steiner School, and which is a alternative school teaching method, which is much more creative and artistic. But I never actually used it. They have a way of teaching the children and so on I had to follow, but I used it for my own personal processing.
Mm. So it was more of an organizational thinking tool for yourself. It wasn't necessarily something you were bringing into the classroom as a teaching technique, or a technique that you were sort of imparting to others at that stage. We know that came later for you, but And so in that stage, it's still hand-drawn mapping. It's still very much a personal tool and technique to just help you
Productivity
get,
tool.
yeah,
Yeah.
get what you need to get done.
Yeah, I had
Yeah.
my mind map. I had my calendar as a mind map. I had a circular mind map calendar for the month ahead, the week ahead, things like that. I developed systems like that for me. So I really need to spatialize information. I need to kind of see where it fits in space and time and
Mm.
create that visual order. That's very important for me.
Yeah, but I think it's actually more important for more people than realize it as
Yeah.
well.
Yes.
And I think you and I probably spoke about this before. You know, we talk about Biggerplate, we talk about mind mapping being a visual spatial technique, whereas you know nearly every software under the sun says it's visual these days, and visual just seems to mean if it's colorful, it's visual. But I think the thing that you hit on there, which I think is really important for more people than probably realize it, is the spatial. You know, we talk about in a mind map again, in my world, it's mainly software based mind mapping, but the location spatially of one topic changes a lot about it. If you move a topic from one place to another, it takes on a whole different context. It takes on new meaning. You need it's, and so the spatial positioning of things is actually, I think, what matters as much, if not more, than the sort of the visual aspect. And I think that's a really fascinating thing because we know, and you probably especially know, that that can be really important for people with learning sort of differences. But I think it's actually quite important for most of us, but we maybe
Yes.
haven't really tuned into it yet.
Yes. Well, there's a psychological term for it called dual coding. And what's interesting about our minds is our memories start off with a working memory, moves to the short-term memory, and moves to long-term memory. And that working memory absorbs the information coming through our senses, and we have to do something with it. And working memory is interesting. It's got two loops in it. It's got the verbal loop and it's got a visual spatial loop. And these two loops, the verbal and the visual spatial, work in our working memory. And for a lot of people, they just use their verbal working memory. And we've got this visual spatial working memory as well. And if we've got a tool that pulls that out of us, it activates it and really enhances our working memory. And our working memory is like the doorway into our mind and our executive functions, our ability to be an executive, our ability to capture information, our ability to focus, and our ability to adapt. Those are the three key executive functions, which is working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. And that working memory's got both visual spatial and phonological in it. Phonological is basically words, speaking words in your head. And so we all need it, we all use it, but we underuse it and to our
Mm.
cost.
And I think that's why, again, there's this sort of recurring narrative through all the years now of running Biggerplate when I've met our members around the world where when people have really gotten mind mapping sort of just as part of their normal day-to-day tool, that the joke I always make is kind of how would you work if I took mind mapping software away from you? And they sort of go, don't really know anymore. And I think that probably is speaking a little bit to that point around it just becomes so in tune with a way of thinking and a way of working, possibly that they hadn't realized before that. And it then becomes a very much an integral part of their kind of toolkit and their techniques for just handling study, work, life in general. But again, it's still something that's surprisingly underknown or under leveraged in the broader terms. Mind mapping techniques or mind mapping tools are still to this day not as known as I would have expected when I started Biggerplate. I thought we'd be well beyond mind mapping by now, but I swear there's something in it about that dual coding and sort of lining up with that's why it sticks with people. Once they get it and stick with it, it's not going anywhere.
What would you say is the awareness level of people in general of mind mapping? How would you rate
I
it?
think it's been very interesting. It's a tricky question to answer, I guess, with anything particularly quantifiable. But my feeling over the years is we've sort of gone through a little bit of an up and down sort of cycle with it. Because when I started Biggerplate, which launched in 2008, really mind mapping knowledge in my peer group, I started that when I was sort of 23. So it was, you know, in the 20-year-old peer group, really not very known. But in an older generation who had encountered Tony Buzan books, Tony Buzan TV show back in the day in the UK, there was an awareness, but there was a skepticism. And I think it's because some of the Buzan stuff got sort of a little bit too seemed a little bit too out there, perhaps for whatever reasons. And so I think this kind of gone in cycles. But now what I see in this era is a lot of people using the term mind map, but they're kind of using it to sort of cover quite a wide range of things, not necessarily what you or I would recognize as a mind map. Now, I don't particularly mind that, but I'm seeing people, scribbling on a whiteboard like that behind me and saying that's a mind map, or sticking post-it notes up and saying that's a mind map. I say, well, not really. So I think the awareness of the term is up, but awareness of the technique is still very fuzzy. I'm not sure it's where we need it to be. And we don't like to go around and correct people when they say something's a mind map or not, but we say, okay, well, that what you've done there looks more like a brainstorm that might fit very nicely into a mind map, or actually what you've done there is more of a concept diagram or a flow chart. And I think we've got to try and help people understand the differences, not to correct them, but so they can understand, okay, in this scenario, a mind map would suit me best, or in this scenario, a network diagram would be best, or a flow chart would be best, because it's kind of right tool for right context, I guess, is my ultimate aim when trying to share with people what is or is not a mind map.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
I think it was my theory on this is I think the term mind maps was a registered trademark by Tony Buzan, and he was quite aggressive in protecting that trademark. And so the net effect was people wanted to say mind map or mind maps, but they couldn't
Correct.
because they felt they would be, under
Yeah.
legal sanction. And so what happened was um, people started to say, well, let's call it a spider diagram or
Yeah.
a
A
web
bubble diagram or yeah,
or,
web. Yep.
or
Yep.
try to sort of work around it.
Yeah.
Now the trademark is no longer relevant,
Mm.
and it's now ubiquitous, and the
Mm.
trademark can't be, held anymore.
It's
Um,
certainly, I think there's a lot of truth in that, and it was the same for us at Bigger Plate. Interestingly, when we launched the site, I think the first version of the site was January 2008, and it was just almost like a holding page to begin with. But we had been told by multiple people as I started to kind of familiarize myself with the world of mind mapping. I was told by multiple people about Tony Bazan was rather trigger happy with his copyright of his term. Result, when we launched Biggerplate as a functioning website with map sharing and all the rest, we didn't use the term mind mapping on our website. We used, I think we called them learning maps, because at that stage we were focused on education. That was kind of where the idea had come from. But obviously, as a result, nobody found us, because people are on Google
yes,
searching for mind maps and mind
yeah,
mapping,
yeah,
and we're
yeah,
over
yeah,
here actively
yeah.
avoiding the term. So
That's
I
right.
think it's interesting because not many
Yeah,
people sort of trigger into that, but I do think that did play a part in a
yeah,
confusion of terms, and maybe not, even some of the software vendors, some of the earliest mind mapping software vendors, I know were quite cautious of their use of the term mind mapping. And as a result, it's almost like nobody's really owned the term mind mapping in terms of, hey, we're a mind mapping product or tool, and maybe the way we might
yeah,
have
yeah.
expected. But yeah.
Yes, I think it's going to change in the future now that the word mind map is no longer a trademark. Um, and also, it's sad that Tony Buzan's died, because Tony Buzan was, such a big, promoter of mind mapping, and all around the world, and just consistently doing it. The other interesting dynamic what has been that people trained by the Busan organization are not allowed to create videos teaching mind mapping and put them on YouTube, according to their sort of terms and conditions, which is one of the reasons why I didn't do the formal training, because I wanted the ability to sort of teach it. And that's why I did the Udemy course and all the rest of
Mm.
it. So it was an awkward situation. It was
Yeah.
great to have that focused discipline of Tony Buzan's principles are absolutely phenomenal. You know, um, one word on one branch, colored branches, you know, images and all those sorts of key principles. Absolutely love the keywords. So, but the cost is that a number of people are now in confusion about what mind mapping is. Is it spider diagram, concept map, all that? I'm not
Mm,
confused. And a lot of teachers have to be careful because they want to stay on the right side of copyright and so on. So they would call them
mm,
spider diagrams and so forth. And in a way, I like to call a lot of what people make, it's like that's a great spider diagram, but it's not quite a mind map yet,
mm.
but it's a great spider. And spider
To
diagrams are
start
really
point.
useful. Great
Yeah.
brainstorming, get it out, etc. And teachers use it a lot. But I found with my daughter that, which comes to the next part of the story, really, I woke up to mind mapping through my daughter. Well, no, actually, but she was saying, "Yeah, Dad, I know about mind mapping. We do spider diagrams at school." And I'm like, "Oh gosh, right." She's been
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
found
Yeah.
it confusing, found it stressed me out. I found it very messy and disorganized, and I didn't really like that experience. But that's because of spider diagram. It's not a mind map. And that's what I experienced with my daughter.
Yeah, I think that sort of, as you say, that confusion for whatever reason it's kind of existed around the technique and the terminology, it does feed into experiences like your daughter had, where people, even with software or pen and paper, doesn't really matter. I've experienced the same with many people over the years who sort of say, my mapping didn't work for me because I found it messy, or it was. And the thing I always find very sort of funny but frustrating is when people say my mapping is messy, because actually, in my opinion, the most powerful aspect of mind mapping, particularly when you get into software, is it creates structure, and it helps you to structure messy information, messy ideas. It forces you into structure, and that for me is what unlocks the power of those ideas and that information. So yes, I've heard similar things over the years, and equally frustrating. But so yeah, you sort of had this your daughter's experience, I guess, probably made you sort of rethink around mind mapping again. And at what point did you start sort of going down the road of doing the Udemy course of mind mapping? And because that was live for quite a number of years. I think it is still live,
It's
is it?
still live. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
still one of the highest
But it
rated
was very
mind mapping
popular.
courses
Yeah, it was
on
very
Udemy.
popular when
Yeah,
I discovered it a long time ago. So what
people are
was your
still
sort of
taking
prompt
it.
for putting that out there?
It was my daughter.
Right.
So,
You
you
said
know,
I've got to show how it's done properly. So I'll record a
yeah,
Udemy course.
yeah, that's what I
I
did.
like it.
So, Khan Academy, how he started to create recordings for his kids, for his nephews. I thought, well, my daughter's not listening to me right now because she's so stressed out, and I'm ready to teach this to her. So I'll just create a little video, and when she's ready, she can watch it. And she did. And did she became dux of her school. She's, used it since. It wasn't straightforward sailing because she had dyslexia. And one of the things I realized, mind mapping is the most recommended strategy, visual strategy for in dyslexia assessments. So if you get a dyslexia assessment, down the bottom, it'll say, we recommend mind mapping, you know,
Right.
in
Yep.
nearly every dyslexia assessment for the last 30 years. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands, millions of people. Um, but it's actually quite hard to be taught mind mapping if you've got dyslexia, because
Right.
people with dyslexia think differently. And what I've realized is there's two ways to mind map. Okay. There's mind mapping from the inside out. Okay. And there's mind mapping from the outside in. And there's two types of thinking: thinking from the inside out, very structured thinking, and thinking from the outside in. And a lot of highly creative people think from the outside in. They've got all this swirling thoughts and ideas and so on. They don't have a real structure to their ideas and so forth. All the details are mixed with the big points, and everything's this sort of swirling melting pot of keywords and concepts and images and ideas. So if you can think of that as a cloud round about it, and then you start pulling things in, into the center, and then you start identifying, oh, that's the main idea. And then you actually realize what the central branches are, and the level two branches and the level three branches are. So what I found was a lot of people with dyslexia kind of, if they were told to mind map from the inside out, they ended up with a mind map that was really disorganized, really unstructured, and really confusing for them. So I started to develop this process, which I called a bullet map, where they would write down bullet points of ideas, underline a few key words, and then pull them into the mind map. So you'd have that sort of brainstorm of ideas. So instead
Yeah.
of, you know how it is, sometimes you create a brainstorm map and then you edit that brainstorm map into what I would call an edit map, you know? So I have three phases of mind mapping: note map, edit map, and memory map. Okay, so you take a note and you just jot down all the ideas randomly as they come, and it doesn't make complete sense to you necessarily at the beginning, but you've got the main content, which often happens in a lecture or whatever. Then edit map, you take that map and you edit it somewhere. How? Either on your computer, or you erase things and redraw things, and or redraw the whole map. And then for a test or exam, you might upgrade it to a memory map, really fill it with images and things like that. You don't often do that. I would say about 80% of my notes are note maps, and you know, 10, 15% are edit maps, and
Mm.
5% are memory maps, but each have their place.
Well, and I would guess with your, I would love that as a progression. I often talk about sort of presentation maps and scratch maps, so something that's kind of presentable if you wanted to,
Yes.
versus something
Yeah.
that's just a bit of a mess for working with.
Love it.
But I
Love
think
it.
also your point around the memory maps is I would almost think of it a bit like a funnel. You might take note maps in 4 or 5 lessons. You might start to turn those into edit maps, but then actually you might sort of coalesce and
Absolutely.
condense into a memory map that actually kind of wraps up the key point from all 5. So I love that. And I think the other thing you talk about, which is really hit the nail on the head for me, actually, because I've been talking about this a little bit recently, but I hadn't phrased it in the same way, which I like. Your phrase around outside in. I think people talk about information overload a lot, not, and what I've often talked about is we often think about information overload as just the stuff that's coming at us. So I guess outside in sort of stuff. But I also like to think of information overload as we've got a lot of stuff in our head already. That's the inside out stuff. And what we're often trying to do is kind of work in tools that are not right for either one. Whereas I think mind mapping can work really well for that kind of almost simultaneous inside out and outside in sort of thinking. I think it's really interesting. And the bullet map concept, getting kids to just list bullet points, forget mind mapping for a second, just make little bullet point notes. This really, I think, hits to something I've been talking about for years, and I still think a lot of mind mapping software doesn't do this very well, is a lot of people don't know what to do with the tools when they get mind mapping software in particular. And one of the things they think they're supposed to do and know that's kind of useful for is brainstorming. Well, actually, most mind mapping software puts you into structure, I think, too soon. Whereas actually what you're talking
Yes.
about with your bullet maps is just get your ideas out. So we talk at Biggerplate about a process of capture, then categorize. And that's exactly, it
Yeah.
sounds like what your bullet maps is
That's
getting
it.
people to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Capture
Yeah.
these ideas and then say, what categories can you see here? Okay, there's a category of this. Let's put those 3 in there. And there's another category of that. Okay, now you got some structure. Now you got the beginnings of your mind map. And that's where I then think you start to do that inside out sort of thinking.
Yeah.
You
That's right.
expand, but it's a very interesting to kind of hear someone who's given it as much thought as you have, like I have, and I think you can see why there's still so much more. I wouldn't say education needed, but people need to kind of see some of these ideas, and it's not just a case of open up mind map software and everything suddenly a light bulb has flicked. It just doesn't work like that, I don't
Yeah.
think.
It's absolutely remarkable. I coach people on a one-to-one basis who have got dyslexia and ADHD to use mind mapping in the workplace as part of my job. And I find it fascinating working with people with dyslexia, because pe people with dyslexia have they don't have a reading problem per se. They have a processing difference that shows up as a reading problem, and it shows up as a writing problem and a note-taking problem and filling in forms problem. All sorts of processes that are don't work often with the visual, dynamic, big picture thinking, problem-solving thinking mind of all these very famous dyslexic people and all these not so famous dyslexic people that make a huge impact in our world. But there's this downside, which is so much of our life is about processing the written word. And mind mapping frees us from the chains of having to process so many written words. We've got keywords, we've got branches, we've got images. We can organize things by moving them around visually rather than copy and pasting a piece of text and moving it down here and take that paragraph and move it there. And it's so watching people who do this and use a mind map who have got processing difficulties is absolutely fascinating, Liam, because you start to realize that some of these mind mapping tools that are really good for dyslexia, are not actually dyslexic friendly. So, for example, when you get down to it, it's like, what are the shortcut keys like? You know? And some of the shortcut keys are a nightmare, you know? And then it's like, what's it like moving branches around? Oh, I can't move this branch around properly. Some software, it's you can't even drag and drop it, you know? You're
Mm.
like, and there isn't a shortcut to move a branch. So I was like, oh, I wish these I'm sure these developers will eventually switch onto this. And after what's now been 35 years of mind mapping and watching the first, I got the first Tony Buzan mind map software. I've had them all. iThoughts, Mind Manager, Iowa, all of them, you know, a lot of them, nearly all of them. And I'm kind of like, iThoughts got really close. iThoughts was incredible. I mean, he was incredible as a developer. One developer created iThoughts. I had so much respect for seeing iThoughts grow up from that little iPhone app to what it is now. And it's such a shame that
Mm.
iThoughts is now shut down. But
Yeah.
um, what, for example, iThoughts had a shortcut where if you hit number one on your keyboard, it would collapse all the branches to level one. If you hit number two, it would expand to level two, level three. I didn't need to click a plus button. I didn't need to do any, I could move at the speed of thought by just clicking buttons rather than click,
Mm.
click, 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 all these clicks all over the place. And all of that impedes your flow of thought. And if you've got dyslexia and if you've got a smaller working memory, it steals your working memory and it steals your train of thought. So what I found was a lot of this computer software, mind mapping, was amazing, but I would get stalled out by some of these technical issues. So
Mm.
eventually I said, no one's going to build this. And I'm 55 years old. I'm going to be dead before anyone does this. And I'm like, why is no one doing voice to map? Why can't I speak to a mind mapping software and it just turn it to a mind map? Surely you could do that, like next branch, command or something, and then put it underneath and whatever. So damn it, no one's going to do it. So let's just start a company and solve this problem once and for all.
Yeah, and so you sort of bring us neatly to the present, and I think it's one of these moments where I guess there's a coming together of technology, what's possible, there's a coming together of kind of narratives in a wider sense around things like neurodiversity and just a growing recognition of there is diversity in how people think and work, and we're not necessarily catering for it as well as we could. And I also remember Biggerplate's global survey that we used to do annually. We haven't done one for many years now, but I remember when we asked people one year, what do you think might be? It was something along the lines of what innovation would you like to see in mind mapping software? And I remember that one of the answers that came up quite high in the ratings was voice to mind map. And I remember very clearly at the time being like, well, who needs that? Like, I couldn't possibly fathom a context in which I would want to do that. But
No way.
yeah, exactly. It was just, but it was so um, illustrative of I've not had that need. I've not had those obstacles. I've not had that point of difference. And so I sort of like just bashing away at my keyboard and throwing things. That's fine. That works for me. But it was a good illustration to be staring me in the face, really, that a really big chunk of our members said voice to mind map would be really good. And I went, wow.
Yeah.
And I just sort of forgot about it until I re-encountered you and then sort of encountered Ivy, which sort of is one of the things that the tool is doing so interestingly is voice to map. And so maybe I'm aware of us speaking for too long and making this video unwatchable, but I think it's just fascinating to work through some of these ideas of the theory of mapping. But then what you've done is you've tried to sort of bake all of that stuff that you've learned over 30 years into a mind mapping tool. But I think it's kind of got some little points of difference. I think what I really admired when I sort of first started looking at your website and how you're sort of pitching the product is it's really clear who it's for. You seem to kind of know who you're really trying to help, and you're designing for that group, and you're not getting distracted with too much else. So maybe Darius, give us a sense of what is ivvi. What's the kind of the elevator pitch for ivvi versus other mind mapping tools, if you like, or what do you think makes it what was worth building for you? You know, that feeling you had of somebody's got to do it. What have you got at this point in the journey that you're sort of most pleased with right at the moment?
Well, I want to solve note taking for visual people in meetings and lectures. You know, taking visual notes in meetings and lectures is really hard, especially if you're taking the meeting, leading the meeting, or if you're a student who's not learned about mind mapping much and so on. You know, you cannot risk losing that information in a lecture. You're only going to hear it once. It's there and then it's gone. And it's super valuable. And you don't want to lose that information by experimenting with the mind map and then suddenly you've not got all that vital information. So what we did was we created ivvi. Now, ivvi stands for Intelligent Voice to Verb Visual Interface. Okay. I really wanted a voice to visual interface. I wanted to speak to a mind mapping software and it turned it into a mind map for me automatically. I didn't want to say next branch or anything. I just wanted it to talk and it create the mind map for me. Because I would often do that for other people. Someone would talk, a client would talk, and I'd say, look, just
Yep.
think, speak out your thoughts. I'll mind map for you. I'll rearrange it. Is this what you're thinking? And like, oh, that's such a relief. Thank you so much for doing that. And I thought, I wondered if an AI could do that for people. And so we created this AI powered voice to visual interface called ivvi, Intelligent Voice to Visual Interface. Let me show it to you.
Mm.
So it looks a bit like this. So what ivvi is doing right now, I've recorded our meeting. Okay. So you can see the audio is being recorded right now. We've got the audio down the bottom. It's like a dictaphone, 38 minutes and 11 seconds. And then we've got the transcript here being transcribed in real time. And then what ivvi does is ivvi maps from the outside in. So ivvi identifies a keyword. Can you see how in that keyword it said audio dictaphone and it's taken out audio and dictaphone and put it in as a keyword, transcript in real time? So ivvi is doing that.
So it's doing there what you or I would do. You know, we like you, we would, we had a period pre-COVID of companies would hire us to come and mind map their
Yeah,
conferences and their roundtables and their events. But what Ivvy's doing right now is the same thing that Darius was doing for his clients. He's taking out of 20 words the two that matter and putting that in the mind map.
right.
And Ivy, the AI, is doing that for us now, picking out the keywords, putting them into the structure.
That's right. And then what ivvi does, and the beauty of this is, um, what I also found in my journey is my wife doesn't like mind maps. You know, she's such a linear thinker. She just finds them frustrating. You know, and I find linear notes really frustrating. So what ivvi does is it combines both worlds. So I've got the transcript here connected to the branch. So I can click on a branch and I can look at the transcript, or she can look at the branch and look on the transcript. She can also see my headings and my icons within the outline mode, you know? And so having a sort of a mind map outline mode that is true to the mind map and synchronizes with it is so fantastic as well for different kinds of thinking, because sometimes you're not always in that flare thinking. There's flare and focus, okay? Flare thinking and focus thinking, and they both need to balance one another. And sometimes with the mind map, it's great for flare thinking. And then sometimes it's really good for focus thinking by editing it down. But sometimes you do need to get into a bullet list, a list of tasks to do, and into that linear view. There's a purpose, there's a place for that, even for mind mappers. So we've synchronized it. So what happens with ivvi is, um, can you see ivvi chose flare focus, and it chose these four keywords out of that chunk of text, and it reckons the main idea is flare focus out of that bigger chunk of paragraphs, and has dual coded it with an icon of the sun. So I can start having images, because that's one of my big frustrations with computer mind maps, how hard it is to integrate images. You know, they're there, but they're buried 2 clicks away. Why can't I just have an automatic image, and then I can just click on it and choose a different image if I want, you know? And ivvi will do that for you, suggest an image, give you other images, and you can change it if you want. But sometimes having that dual coding is really helpful for a visual thinker. So it helps you sort of anchor it visually
Hmm.
instead of with words. Um,
And I
so
think one of the things
this is ivvi.
I just want to point out to people who are watching this as well, Darius, which again may not be obvious until you do it, but down there in the topic where you had flare focus, for example, if you could just go back to that, the key thing that I thought was really awesome when I was looking at this before was you see under flare focus, it's actually got duplication. So it's got mind map twice and it's got flare focus twice, just in the purple branch just above where you are, I think.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that one.
and so this would be a good example of where, Ivy is essentially doing the note map, isn't it? In your process,
Yes,
you had note map, edit map, memory map.
yes,
And what you would be saying is
yes,
Ivy's going to do the note map, then Darius is going to
yes,
overlay on this to do some editing. So, for example,
yeah,
where it's got duplication or it's maybe chosen keywords that you go, it's not quite got that one right. You were able, when we talked previously around this, you were able to go back and be editing,
yeah,
knowing that the map and the tool is still capturing the, so if I was a student in a
yeah,
lecture, I could go through back to the purple branches and
yeah,
remove the old stuff, knowing that the tool is continuing to branch and map out what's happening in
yeah,
real time. So it's a really amazing sort of combination of real time and editing, sort of going back and you're very, very powerful. And I think I didn't know how to do live real time mind mapping when I was at university. It never even occurred to me to take a laptop into a lecture theatre because I was at university in an era where not many people did that. But I suspect nowadays, if I went into a lecture theatre at university, probably 90% of the students will have a laptop open and be typing their notes that way. But I think what you've got here is just something that's giving it that structure, and it's giving it that maneuverability and not having to scroll up and down 16 pages of a linear notebook. Instead, you're just moving a branch and saying, I think that belongs back with that. He mentioned that now, but I think actually that relates to what he was talking about earlier. So I'm going to move that up there, move around all the things that I would do live mind mapping for clients at Biggerplate. But that's quite a skill, and it's a pretty niche
yes,
skill as well. Not many people would
yes,
necessarily need that skill. I needed that
yeah,
skill for clients, but to have the tool do the capturing, the categorizing, even if it's not 100% right, that's not the point. It's taken that load off your mind to then go and do the editing and to then do that next step you talked about, which is probably say, right, now I want to get this really tight because it's going to be one of my memory maps, to use your phrase.
yeah, yeah. And one of the things that, I mean, ivvi is just been launched like 4 or 5 months ago. It's now being government approved for disability students allowance. The government will pay for it for students with dyslexia in the workplace and in university and the workplace, like a 3-year license, unlimited transcription of every lecture that you do. You've got the audio, you've got the transcript, and you've got the mind map. It's just a dream. But It's my dream, you know,
Mm.
and I think it's a lifesaver for a lot of people. But what the next stage that's quite exciting is we've got this quote button that's called highlight at the moment. But if you click the highlight button and something important is being said, what if you do is clip that quote from the transcript and add it in as a note onto the branch in the mind map. So what will happen is, what I would love to see for students, can you see that note has just been added in there as text
Yeah.
into that branch? So this map or that branch can be pulled out and put into an essay map or something else, and the information will go with it, etc. So what will happen is, this is my dream. So my dream with ivvi is that people can have the transcript synchronized to the map. They can then hit the quote button. And so let's say we have said 30 things that I thought were really useful quotes through this conversation. I'm left with 30 branches with those quotes on it that then compose the main substance of my mind map. And it's made from my decisions, not the computer's decisions about what it thinks is the right summary. The ethos of ivvi is that the AI should show its thinking, not just suddenly create something magical that's separated from the text. And I don't realize it skipped over some block of text that's important in that. And I've been fooled into thinking it's covered everything. Because when you
Mm.
track it in a mind map, you can see where the gaps are. And that's one of the reasons why I
Yeah.
wanted to create ivvi, because I want, if ChatGPT gives me an output, I now put it into ivvi and I click map it, and it immediately turns the text into a mind map, and I can see where it skipped over things. I can see the text, I can see the map, and I can click on things in the text and I go, where's the branch for that? It didn't think it was important, but I did. So instead of allowing that to happen, we're going to encourage people to hit the quote button. And you can be in any meeting, watching, listening to any podcast, watching a YouTube video, in a Teams meeting, whatever. And you could just have this little quote button in the bottom and you just hit quote. You might not even see the mind map. We've got like a mini ivvi that we've just developed that's a tiny little button with a tiny little window and the word that's being said and the note button in the corner. So you can do everything on your screen and you just hit note. You could even have it on your phone. And so what happens is you end up with these really valuable quotes, and the quotes are in the mind map.
Yeah.
So you've got this kind of edit map stage where you've got the keywords of every paragraph, and then you've got the next level up, which is quotes. And that's when, from an educational point of view, you find the gold and silver. I call it finding the gold and the silver in a meeting or in a lecture. And if you think about gold as the level one branches, two, three, four, five, seven maximum level one branches. And then you've got the level two branches, which I call the silver. And then you've got the level three, which are the quotes. That's all you need.
Mm.
And it's absolutely remarkable. If you go through 5,000 word talk, 45-minute talk, say 5,000 words. So it's about 7,000 words in a 1 hour talk. And you just looked at and got AI to go through it and pulled out quotes that sort of took out the important points of every single element of the talk just as a quote rather than a summary. It goes down to 1/10 of the size, just in text.
Mm.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And then you reduce it further down by 1/10 by putting into keywords in a branch of maps, and then further into the silver and the gold. It's just sublime. You get information at every level you want it, the gold level, the quote level, the transcript level, and everything in between. That's my dream.
It's it's amazing to see. So thank you for showing it as well, as much as anything. But I think what sort of resonates with me in many ways, what you've just shown and shared as well, is whenever I've done training, mind mapping software for years, webinars, whatever you want to call it, I've always said the notes feature is one of the most powerful underleveraged features in mind mapping software, and it's universal, right? Any half decent mind mapping software, you should be able to add notes onto a topic. It's unremarkable, but it's
Yeah.
incredible. And I've always said to people, what we want to try and do is keep the surface level of our mind maps down to just the keywords, because we want that information to be easily moved. You know, if you've got big blocks of text, it's just as overwhelming as if it's in a linear document, but also it's less movable. It's just a pain in the ass to move things around. So we always try to encourage people to keep the surface level of the mind maps, just a couple of keywords per topic, nice and movable, nice and flexible, but then put the depth and the detail into those topic notes. You know, so I will take paragraphs from websites or paragraphs from emails or things that I just want to have handy, but I don't want to have to jump out of my mind map. So I'll put those into the notes on a topic. Really simple functionality that's been there as long as I've been mind mapping. So I love that you've kind of taken that and made that such an integral part of the tool. To leverage the notes feature in a mind mapping tool, but in a new way, I think is really, really fantastic innovation wise. I think it's actually then speaks to the second thing that really lands with me when you talk about ivvi and your journey is this is a mind mapping tool developed by a mind mapper. And I think it
Yes.
shows up in really interesting little ways. And
Yeah.
only kind of people who've lived and breathed mind mapping for 24 hours since they were 20 years old, like I have, and I'm now 40. So, you know, it's quite a while. I think you can see this. And interestingly, what I've been frustrated with perhaps over the last 5 years is with some of the mind mapping software products, I feel they're increasingly being developed and maintained by people who don't mind map. Because you see some of the interface choices or you see menus popping up right where you're trying to write your thing, and it's just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
how is this helping me with that kind of flow state of mind mapping? So I
That's
think
right.
you're absolutely to be sort of congratulated on developing a mind mapping tool with mind mapping really at its heart. But I think I love things like the use of the notes feature, which again will just pass other people by as well, that's a cool little feature, but I think it's absolutely making the most out of mind mapping. And I often talk about this kind of first layer and second layer, not in terms of branch levels, but the surface level and then the layer
Yes.
behind. So to put like the depth and the detail behind the surface and also have that confidence that it's there in the notes is really, really powerful, because you can kind of then forget about it and move on. And that's equally important, to not get bogged down trying to write word for word everything. And so that's where I think I totally missed going back to that survey, those survey results. I totally missed the potential for voice mapping. I really did miss it. I did not see that as a potential at all. And it's just fabulous to see, you know, and how long did you say ivvi's been live?
4 months, 5 months,
Right?
something like that,
So
you know.
as of June, what are we? June 11th, 2025, we're seeing the 4-month-old version of ivvi. And I think most people in my circle of Biggerplate community are going to look at that and go, well, that's pretty cool. So I think huge congratulations to you and Roman, who I know has been working with you on the tool. And I think it's just a really genuinely innovative addition to the mind mapping software ecosystem. And I think you absolutely like deserve a huge amount of credit for that. But what I love about it is it's been developed with mind mapping right baked into it. It's not just,
Yes.
hey, we can knock
Yes.
together an AI mind map generator. It's
Yeah.
not working
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that.
No, that's not AI. I think what's going to happen is AI is going to transform the mind mapping interfaces in the future. You know, we're not going to plug in AI into a mind map software and ask it, oh, generate some ideas for me on this topic or generate this. You know, that's too basic. That's actually not that hugely helpful for most people. It's just like, help me organize my own thoughts here, not give me more thoughts, you know?
Mm,
Um, and so it's kind of like the invention of electricity and if you imagine a brush, you brushing your floor with a brush, and someone says, here's electricity, let's make an electric brush. You could plug the electricity into the brush and maybe replicate the brushing movement like some Disney movie or something like that. But actually, an electric brush ends up being a rotary Hoover, you know, with a rotary drum. So the actual brushing function is still there. And I think the same thing's going to happen for mind mapping. We're still mind mapping the brush, but the AI powered mind mapping will have a different interface. And that's the key thing. It's the interface that's so important. And that's what's frustrated me a lot with a lot of mind mapping software is the interface is resisting me for what I want. I want to
Mm.
be able to talk to the mind map. I want to be able to move things effortlessly. I want to be, so for example, I want to be able to take a piece of text, paste it into my mind mapping software, and it turn it into a mind map for me instantly. Why can't I do that? I was like, Ivy can do that now.
Mm.
I want to be able to do a little voice note and Ivy mind map that voice note and turn help me understand what my thoughts are. Ivy can do that. And
Mm.
I want to be able to take a PDF, drop it in, and it turn it into a mind map for me so I can visualize that whole PDF. Ivy's going to be able to do that, but not yet. Um, I want to mind map a podcast or a YouTube video. Ivy can do
Mm.
that. I mean, I want to be able to mind map everything in my life. I want to be able to mind map. I don't want mind mapping to be a task for me to do. It's like, yeah, I should mind map that. I'll get round to mind mapping that. No, I want it now, and I want it to leapfrog me to my next level of thinking. And I think that's where we have the potential with AI to do all that.
Well, and I think you sort of touch into a couple of interesting areas there, and I've since I guess since that period where ChatGPT sort of exploded into mainstream awareness, pretty much from that day, I get asked on a weekly, daily basis about AI and mind mapping, and what does this mean? Where does it go? We've got some great software partners who are doing interesting things with AI, but we also have some really fantastic sort of thought leaders in the space we're in, and who've done webinars for us talking about AI. And you, with your background in education, I'm sure will be very tuned into this idea that the goal shouldn't be to replace thinking. It should be to accompany thinking, to help thinking. And I also take your point as well of we've been talking about information overload for the last 20 years. So the idea that it helps us to generate more stuff, I'm not so sure on that actually.
Yeah,
But
we
to
don't
have
want to.
something that can help us kind of refine, or we talk about diverge and converge. You talked about flare and focus. It's the same principle, right? So to have things that can help us. Yes, I like the idea of a mind mapping tool that might help me, give me some prompts or some ideas if I'm stuck, if I'm trying to map something out and I go, I don't know what this means, give me some information. Great, that's useful. But I agree with you. The idea that we just get AI to generate mind maps for us, I'm not sure we need that as such. But if you're going to take it to the next level and work with that, refine it, so move from that note map to your edit map, to use your terminology as well, you've got to keep the mapping is the power of mind mapping is in the process. It's not in the output. Very rarely are
Yeah.
people asked for a mind map as the end deliverable. I think what most of the time we're looking for is clarity. So if we can
Well,
work with the information, then we get the clarity. If we just say, here's my mind map, you haven't really absorbed anything.
yeah, here's a little exercise, a little visual
Mm.
exercise I'll share with you. We could go to Wikipedia and look at mind mapping, okay? And we take the text from the mind mapping and we'll use a function in ivvi called text to map, okay? And I'm just going to copy this text. I'm going to go over to ivvi and click text to map, paste the information in and ask it to create a mind map for me. And what ivvi's done is it's created this instant mind map of the text. And what it's done is I can see, it's talking about mind map, differences, research, features, automatic creation tools. And the important thing with ivvi is not generating information. ivvi is not reorganizing.
Mm.
It's forced to stay in the timeline, connect it to the text, make sure it's an accurate representation of each block using the exact words that are in it, etc. Not a summary, etc. And what happens is I now get the Lego building blocks to help me think through this. And so what I would foresee is in the future, ivvi will be able to read this out to you with speech to text. And you could listen to this article from Wikipedia. You could see the key word that's being highlighted related to it. And while you're listening, you could just drag around a few branches, edit a little bit. Oh, that's not important. Delete that, move that, and so on. And at the end of it, you've got something that's been a joy to just absorb and create, and you can be in the flow. So the
Mm.
goal is to stay in the flow of your ideal thinking state.
Yeah. And I think that's where, again, that idea is, you then, there's a book that I love, which was over here. That was a bit of a further stretch than I was expecting there. This is a really fantastic book that I read a few years ago, and occasionally, you read, or I do, because this is my life. I read a book, and I'll think, wow, this could be talking about mind mapping, and it's not. It's not a
Wow.
book about mind mapping, but it's about the power of curation and about refining and how powerful that can be in all sorts of contexts. I think it talks about sort of the British Museum has I think it was 40 million artifacts in their collection, but in the British Museum on show at any given time are 4,000. And it's this idea that the skill in curators at the British Museum or any museum is to show people the best examples of all of their stuff, to give people the narrative, the information, the essentials. And I think what you're showing with your example there of text to map in ivvi is you go from having to create everything to then maybe taking on a slightly higher level curation role. So you get a lot of information out
Yes.
into the map, and then you
Yes.
start to curate. Don't need that. Build this more, build on that more, add an image here, add an image there, don't need that. So that curation role then moves that information into a much more refined state for whatever it is you need next. And that's where, again, you're still working, you're still thinking. My concern with AI mind mapping is that people push a button, get a map, and think they've somehow done something. It's not how
Yes.
it is. So to actually say, here's your skeleton, your scaffolding. Now go do something with it, do some curation, do some development, make to know. I think that's where I can see things like this really becoming very powerful. But we need to collectively, we need to sort of give people the signals that it's not just push a button, get a map. The
Yeah.
mapping is what creates the power in your
That's
brain. It's
right.
not the existence of a
Yeah.
mind map artifact.
I think I don't know if you've used any of these AI code tools like Cursor or anything like that. So a lot of these AI coding interfaces are really fascinating because they're using inbuilt AI model like Claude 3.7, and anyone can just go to that and code. But these interfaces are using the same AI, but the results are so much better because of the interface. And it's fascinating using these interfaces because sometimes the AI makes a suggestion and it says yes or no. Do you agree or do you not? Shall I apply that or shall I not? So there's human agency
Right.
involved
Yeah.
in curating the decisions, the suggestions. And I think that's a really important part of it. And also in these things, it's showing the connection between um, an intention and a decision and a suggestion. You can see why it's made it. It's sharing its reasoning rather than just giving you this
Yeah.
end result. So one of the things I'd love to see with ivvi is like, you know how the quote button, you could click quote, 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 quote as you're going along. Well, for a new student, we're going to have it so that ivvi can go on auto mode and suggest a quote and highlight it gently. And then at the end of the lecture, you've got some suggested quotes that you can go through and say, oh, yes, I'll keep that. No, yes, 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 no, no, no. And it's kind of nudging them towards how
So it's
important.
ivvi is sort of saying, I think this sounded important,
Yes,
basically.
yes. And
Yeah.
you go, oh, yeah, yeah, that is important. And maybe even the button for the quote button might glow a little bit at that point. And you, oh, why are you glow? Oh, yeah, that is important. And you click yes, confirmed. You know what I mean? So the
Yeah.
AI is there to sort of support you in your way of thinking.
Mm.
And I think, and also to sort of model it a bit to a student. So it's modeling, taking a paragraph into keyword, modeling, identifying quotes, modeling, identifying silver and gold nuggets, and adding in images. It's kind of just sort of modeling it because a lot of the
Mm.
time, mind mapping hasn't really been seen by people being done.
Yep.
You might watch on a video and someone saying, "Let me show you how to mind map electromagnetism," and you're like, "I'm not interested in that." But if it was about Manchester Football Club, and you were just talking about Manchester Football Club and all the different players and strategies and things like that, and it mind mapped it, you go, "Oh my goodness, that's really useful. Can I have a
Yeah.
copy of that,
It's
please?"
two things there that I think are really important. One is, Biggerplate is, the heart of Biggerplate is a library of mind maps. It's a library
Yes.
of sort of the end artifacts or templates, I guess, and not necessarily the end, but it doesn't necessarily, in its historic form, that doesn't necessarily show people how did this person arrive at this end output. And so
Yeah.
again, over the years, we've done a lot more webinars, videos, all this sort of things with real people around the world, specifically to try and do that thing you said is, well, if you're a marketing executive, you maybe thinks mind mapping might be helpful. You want to see how other marketing execs are using mind mapping. If you're a project manager, you want to see how other project managers do it. You don't just want to see mind maps about project
That's
management. You want to see the process that led to the mind map. So I think to illustrate those and sort of model it, whether it's via AI and the tools or via sort of user stories and videos, is the same objective, really. We've got to show people how does this stuff fit with what you're
Well,
trying to do.
isn't it fascinating? Like I think it's so valuable, Liam, because what you're doing there, because sometimes you just need someone to say, "Hey, did you know you could mind map that?" And then they go, "Gosh, I never thought I could mind map that. That's so true. I could." Like I did a webinar for these parents with dyslexia, for Dyslexia Scotland, and I said there's about 24 different ways you could use a mind map through your educational process program, you know? For a start, if someone gives you like what do you call it where you've got the contents of what you're just about to be taught,
Or the syllabus, the
syllabus. Yeah,
curriculum, that
someone
sort
gives
of
you a
stuff. Yeah.
syllabus and you're like, oh gosh. But what if you mapped it, the
Mm.
syllabus, and you see the map of the syllabus? Oh gosh, that's beautiful. I get it. That's the big picture. Or why don't, if you've got and you're in a flat and your flatmates are discussing all your different responsibilities, who's doing the electrics, who's doing the gas, who's cleaning the rota, who's dealing with that, and so on. Put it on a mind map, organize it, discuss it. It's a great way of organizing it. And you're like, oh gosh, yes, we could. Oh gosh, yes, I could do this. Oh,
Mm.
write an essay, memorize something for a test or do a flash map and then you go, gosh, yes, and it's all the same thing.
Mm.
It's just a mind map. Keywords, branches, images, but a different application that has a transformative effect.
Yeah. So, Darius, I'm keeping an eye on the clock and thinking of your other commitments and your lunch. But just as a sort of parting thought, then we've sort of talked about the past, we've talked about the present, and you've shown us what ivvi is doing, age 4 months old, which I think is pretty impressive. But in headline terms, and you've told us about some of the things you're sort of dreaming about in terms of where you're hoping this leads. But let's maybe look for the next kind of 12 months of what is still a very new product. You've, I'm guessing, already got some pretty interesting feedback and engagement from early stage customers and testing and all these kind of things. So what does the sort of the near horizon future look like for ivvi? What's sort of what's on your mind and sort of getting you excited or keeping you up at night in terms of where to go next in the future for the product?
Um, the future really will be someone might think, oh, I've got a PDF. Can I mind map it? Will ivvi mind map it? Yes. I've got a slideshow. Will ivvi mind map my slideshow? Um, I've got and pull out all the images and put them on the branches for me so I can reorganize them with the original images. And so we're gonna have like PDF to map, slideshow to map, voice to map, meeting to map, YouTube to map, podcast to map, all these different things of sources that you'd really love to see a mind map in. So that's a big one. The
Mm.
quote button will be fantastic. The We want it so that it can be on an iPhone as well, so that you can be in a meeting and just hit the quote button as well. Another thing is often you want to take a photo of something, okay, and put it in your mind map. So ivvi is going to, if you click on the branch and you right click, add a photo, it'll open up a QR code, a unique QR code, and you take your photo, your phone, scan it with that QR code, take your photo, and it will be in ivvi as a photo. So if you're in a meeting, you see a slide or something, you don't want to take a photo, transfer it over, interrupt your whole flow, that sort of thing. It's all
Mm.
about rapidly getting that image in. The next thing I'd really love to see is automatically AI generated central images that's pull together all the information in the keywords in that map. And we've got that functionality happening. So if somebody's really into cubism or Dungeons and Dragons or pointillist art or whatever, you can choose that style and it creates this beautiful central image that makes that computer mind map memorable. And that's one of the
Yeah.
key things I want mind mapping to go into. I think there needs to be this unifying of hand-drawn mind maps and computer mind maps, which really worked well in iPad, but needs to go to the next level in digital maps, where it
Mm.
becomes hyper visual and really rich visually. That's the infrastructure we've created so that we can go into that world of images.
Ironically, taking you somewhat full circle back to your beginnings of hand-drawn
Oh
mind
yeah,
mapping and
absolutely.
that era.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating.
Because I still
Yeah.
think this Tony Buzan's original vision of they need to be unique, branch structures, thick branches, thin branches, textures, images that evoke emotion and joy and are unique to you and interesting and memorable. It's so important, but it's so hard to do. But if he knew you were really into football and golf and sailing, maybe it will create sailing related images and iconography and so on for you,
Mm.
etc., and change the texture of the branches and the shapes of the branches according to the theme and so on, like a hand-drawn mind mapper will do. So basically, ivvi, it will eventually, I'd say in the next 3 years, be able to mind map in any mode you
Mm.
want. And also, one other thing that I want is I want ivvi to be able to take a photo of a mind map and import that photo and turn it into an ivvi mind map instantly. So it can read the mind map. So if you've got a screenshot of another software mind map or whatever, and you're like, how do I import this in? I don't know how to do it. Just take the photo, import it in, and ivvi's turned it into mind map. Ivvi can do that in the back end right now. We haven't brought it into the front end yet. So these are all the kind
Mm.
of things, just how to make mind mapping easy to do on a daily basis. Just
Mm.
mind map every day, multiple times a day, and just see what you're thinking.
Yeah. So you've got a busy few years ahead then.
Yes,
But it
very
sounds like
exciting.
that's an exciting few years ahead as well. Well, I think that seems like a great point for us to pause, Darius. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate the time we've spent prior to this call, sort of exploring the tool and chatting as well. It's always nice for me to connect with people who are as mildly obsessed with this field as I am. So that's always nice for me. Yeah, so anybody watching, do go take a look at ivvi.app. I'm sure you won't be disappointed. You'll be probably blown away like I was with what's possible with something that's still so young. So again, congrats to Darius and his team for putting something I think pretty unique together that really has got mind mapping at its core. It's not an afterthought. Darius, we shall look on with interest at what comes next and the developments coming out of ivvi, and I'm sure we'll catch up again relatively soon. But in the meantime, thank you so much for taking the time to demo a bit of the product, to talk about the backstory, and to share a little bit of vision for the future, the dream, as you put it. And yeah, we'll all be watching with interest for sure.
Thank you, Liam. And you know that report you were talking about? I read that report. I've got it saved on my thing on my computer, and it was one of the things that really encouraged me to keep going at this.
Oh,
So
great! Well,
thank you for
that's
that
very
report.
nice to hear. I appreciate that. But yes, we'll leave you and watch on with interest on the ivvi roadmap taking shape. But in the meantime, well done for such great stuff so far, and we'll look forward to what comes next.
Thank you,
Thank
Liam.
you.